serious, people who do have worked at theme parks, Disney, Universal, Six Flags, etc. What are the best stories you have from those days, whether it's behind the scenes, security, guest relations, and so on? Universal. A group of about a half dozen or so people who worked the front gate got a scam together. They would direct the massive amounts of Asian tour groups who didn't speak English directly through the entrance without stopping by the ticket booths. The front gate workers, who were just supposed to scan tickets, were collecting $100 per person who entered and splitting the daily loot among themselves. When they got caught, they had over $100,000 stashed around the park's front plaza that they were taking out in stages. That was the money from a single weekend. After checking the camera records, they had been doing it for 6 months. All I know is that they gutted the whole front game team. No idea if they pressed charges. Second, a guy snuck a gum into the park once after his girlfriend broke up with him and killed himself in front of her. Tragic stuff. The higher-ups redirected park traffic for a couple hours to clean up. Ended up paying off everyone who witnessed it. And were able to keep themselves out of the news for the most part. I do know they shut down the restaurant in the park where it happened specifically. Also, on a happier note, Snoop Dogg occasionally comes into town. Rolls by a boys' home, orphanage, in a city school, or something similar and personally brings a group of 20-30 broke kids to Universal for a day. He hangs out with them all day. Lets them travel in a limo bus. The whole nine. It's never publicized. He's a great guy. At the Mouse we had a kid who had a checklist shirt on. On it said Darth Maul, Darth Vader. Then the last one beat cancer. The kid was 6 years old. Then I'm told backstage that the parents wanted to do something special for him in the show. But my director couldn't find a spot in the show where this special moment would work. So we finished the show, Jedi Training Academy, and set up a meet and greet with the kid. I get out there and this kid's whole family is at the greeting area. I mean everyone. So I hear "Okay champ, you ready?" Kid replies yup. He pulls out this pill, swallows it, and the family breaks down crying. The kid yells, "I'm a real Jedi." Come to find out the kid took his last chemo pill that eradicated his cancer in front of us. He waited all morning to show us that he was brave and a true Jedi. We were all holding back tears. I worked at Disney. Amazing if you are a young straight male. I actually had a hot mom come on to me one time. You are supposed to tell people to always keep their shirts on. One time a pretty attractive woman in her late 30s early 40s was wearing a bikini top. I kindly told her she needed to put a shirt on and she drunkenly looked at me and said, "You like my tits, don't you?" Then she tried kissing me. I was kind of taken aback and found out later in the day she was removed for being drunk disorderly in a kids show. Another one was some kid who got onto Tower of Terror. Pulled the seat belt out as long as it would go. Buckled it so it wouldn't alert the system but basically got out of the seat belt, if that makes sense. He held on and they caught him on surveillance. I think he got kicked out, but it could have been a lot worse. He would have died probably and it would have been a mess, literally and figuratively. Speaking of dying, a dad forced his crying kid onto roller coaster. Gave him the usual spiel of "Don't be a wimp. Spent all this money to come. Blah blah." Then the kid ducking died cause he had a pre-existing condition. I am sure that man could never live with himself. I worked at Disney. You're supposed to get fired for eating the food. Truthfully, I never worked and just got paid to eat all of the food in the kitchen. Also, the managers take photos of people throughout the parks and send them in a group message to make jokes about them. Not an employee, but the most comedic thing I ever saw at Disney World was a 50-ish-year woman driving around in her scooter, double fisting margaritas, with her finger on the scooter horn. Driving around at Epcot and honking at anyone who even slightly came in her path of driving. To be noted, the expression on this woman's face was an expression of extreme hatred. Like, mon lady, it's Disney World. There's lots of people here and it's slow for everyone, regardless of walking or on a scooter. that didn't stop me from following her around laughing my ass off silently. Six Flags Great Adventure has a trailer park for their international workers not far behind Batman Stunt Arena. The internationals throw awesome parties. People of all cultures just getting it faced together after work. 18-yo supervisor me was super cool with all the internationals. And would always be invited to their parties. Normal employees were never supposed to be back there. Had to drunk fake an Eastern European accent a few times to get out of trouble. I felt like I learned a lot about seeing how kids react to different parenting styles. The short of it is if you treat your kid like an adult, they'll act like one. At a water ride, people will regularly leave backpacks and such before getting on. I've seen 5-year-olds independent enough to get them without any fuss, and I've seen 10-year-olds try to throw other peer play stuff in the water. The parents could see them the whole time, and how they react to their kids' behavior will stay with me forever. Universal. I worked the stroller rentals near the front of the park. Usually closing. There was always something fascinating about just standing on the street watching the last few groups of people heading towards the exit and seeing the bare bones of the park before the cleaning crews coming in. I was working the last night of the Christmas celebration, Grinchmas, and I was just standing out there, and you could see the big Christmas tree in the main plaza if you were just standing out on the entranceway. So I was doing my usual reflecting, and I'm looking at the tree knowing it's the last night of Grinchmas, and I see them power it down. The Christmas season is my absolute favorite time of year, and seeing it get powered down sent this sense of one more year until I get to experience this again. I left later that year, but that always stuck with me, and it's been like 4 years. Worked for the mouse. One of the most interesting days of my time there included having to escort a group of over 200 Argentinian teenagers out of the park. And to be trespassed. When they come, they sign an agreement saying that they won't chant ad nauseam. Apparently the surge is too much for most of these groups. Also, most of the CMs are college kids, and they're all ducking. I worked at a Cedar Point park for a summer, and my favorite was working on Pride Night. I worked in games, and my co-worker and I were holding the big prizes to attract people to play. I was holding a giant penguin, and my co-worker had a giant Hello Kitty. A really drunk guy came up to my co-worker and said, "OMG, Hello Kitty is awesome," and gave her a high five. He looks at me and says, "Penguins are ducking, stupid, but you're cool," and he half skipped away. It was hilarious. I worked one season at Kings Island in Mason, Cincy, Ohio. Nothing really happened outside of the occasional drunks picking fights or acting stupid. However, our Boo Blasted Dark ride had an insane amount of sexual activity. I've seen more head bobbing and finger blasting than I'd care to ever see again, if I'm being honest. I worked for Six Flags for 2 seasons in college. One as a parking lot attendant for 1 season, camped out at the parking exits to make sure people didn't drive in, and drove the parking lot tram. Not much interesting happened there. Second season I worked as a security guard. That season is just more notable for all the people who act like ducking idiots. One of the more memorable things I saw was a guy who damn near killed himself after shoplifting from a gift shop. Security actually didn't really get involved with shoplifting, as that was the loss prevention's role. But we shared the same radio channel. I hear on the radio traffic that they are watching a suspected shoplifter. And after they see him take merchandise and attempt to leave without paying, one of the loss prevention staff attempts to make contact with the guy and stop him. Dude bolts out the door and makes a beeline to a 8-ish foot tall wooden fence, which is where I see him. Dude climbs up it and throws his legs over the top, thinking the ground is just about 8 feet below him on the other side, where he will continue fleeing. The thing is, from the top of the fence it's a pretty substantial drop to the in-park railroad tracks below. I'd estimate 20 feet, maybe a bit more. Dude got royally ducked up when he landed. I think broke both his legs and pelvis, as well as sustained a pretty nasty head injury. Dude lived from what I understand. But I imagine those were life-altering injuries. All for a stuffed animal, a few other bits of souvenir crap. There are other stories, but that one was the most serious. I taught surfing at the wave pool at Disney's Typhoon Lagoon for 2 1/2 years. A wave comes out every 90 seconds by 12 chambers opening up along the back wall, which lets out 80,000 gallons of water per wave. While this happens, like the ocean, there is a strong current at the bottom which sucks water back into the chambers. If you are too close to the wall, you will get sucked under. This happened once to one of the instructors and the kid that he was pushing into the wave. Luckily, because the kid was attached to the board, he came back up immediately, but the instructor did not. The head instructor on land had to hit the emergency switch which turns off the wave pool, and the lifeguard radioed the engineer to open the chambers. The instructor who got sucked into the chamber was stuck underwater with no way out for a good 45 seconds before the chambers finally opened back up. It was pretty scary to say the least. Another time I accidentally was too close to the wall and almost got pulled into the chambers. Luckily I wasn't that close and managed to avoid it by kicking really hard. In the midst of frantically sprint swimming away from the wall, I ended up pulling my left hamstring due to the force of being pulled under by so much water. Needless to say, I always kept a good distance from the wall after that. Perfect. I've been there for 3 years now and have quite a few stories. Here's a few. On mobile, so sorry if formatting is clunky. 1. The year I got hired. Some dude brought a gum in. He was looking for his ex who also worked there. He took out the gum when he found her but didn't shoot. Freaked out a whole ton of people and ran to the water play area. He locked himself up in a dressing room and healed himself. The park just closed off that area and continued operations as usual. It happened in the afternoon. The body was there till closing. It was after that incident that the park decided to install metal detectors. 2. There's a reason why there's signs all over the escalators saying to watch your children and not let them sit on the steps. Well, this one mom didn't give a duck. Her little boy sat there and his fingers got caught in the side and he started screaming. Mom panics and yanks him out, severing all 4 fingers. They never found the pinky. 3. Some guy came up to me once and took a few packets of mustard from my cart. Asked me if I liked mustard. Then proceeded to just eat the mustard by itself and smiled at me with his mustard yellow teeth. Then he left after saying he liked me and that he would tell everyone to buy hot dogs at my cart. I worked for Michigan's Adventure for 4 summers when I was in high school. Biggest amusement park in Michigan. I worked in admissions. Saw a couple fights that turned into family brawls. People trying to sneak brews into the park. People with obviously fake re-entry stamps. Deliberately left a Snickers bar on the lunch table during a super hot day and it looked like a big poopy. 15-year-old me thought it was the funniest thing ever. Also, while working the turnstiles, my teenage friends thought it was funny to walk by and nonchalantly press the lock button on each other's machines. I have told lots of people to go ahead and walk through, just to get smashed in the gonads by a turnstile. Good times. I was a roller coaster supervisor at Caroline's, a large theme park just outside of Charlotte, North Carolina. This is short and to the point. It was Sunday, which meant it was new employee day. The park was hellish to work at and suffered constant turnover. New employees were constantly being hired. I was training a new employee how to drive the roller coaster. When the train pulls into the station, a small child wiggles out from under his lap bar before we release them. He jumps out onto the platform, reaches into his pants, and throws a large human sheet down onto the platform and runs off sobbing. The employee I was training not only didn't quit, she was later my hand-picked replacement when I quit months later. I used to work at Six Flags in the character department. One time I was helping Petunia, this drum guy, because assaulted and tried to rip my head off in front of guests. I kicked him in the gonads and had security escort him out of the park. Worked at various rides at Six Flags over Texas. Lot of 6 acts occurred on Yosemite Sam's Gold River Adventure. Most of the people were adults. Best part was when we'd stop them on the lift and tell them we knew what they were doing. Also worked the chaparral, antique cars. They have lawnmower engines and if you knew where the throttle was you'd get the car to go faster. We also did jousting with the bamboo that was growing around the ride. Not insanely fun, but for a bunch of 16-17-year-olds we made it a blast. Around 1999 I may or may not have gotten it on with my then wife on the unmonitored and unsecured employee picnic tables behind the IMAX theater at Six Flags in Gunny. I worked for a different really small park. I was part of the lifeguards. I always had rum mixed with my Coke. Never knew other lifeguards did it too until I started wondering why one of the girls was always drinking orange juice. Turns out it had vodka in it. I worked at Six Flags. Got hit on by a guy in a Bugs Bunny costume through my entire shift. He forced me to hold his hand. Poor. A kid picked a nickel up off the ground, swallowed it, and immediately threw it up. LP was in a store, and this guy thought he was being slick by putting on a sweater and leaving the store. LP chased after him and the people working in that store heard the guy crying because he got caught. You honestly see a lot of crazy people working in theme parks. I can't tell you the number of times I was screamed at by people even after helping them. Lots of calls to first aid for people being dehydrated and lots of kids who wandered away from their parents. I used to draw caricatures at Michigan's Adventure and it was wild. On 2 separate occasions a man tried to get me and my boss to draw his deceased infant only to have his wife find out and start screaming or crying that it was disrespectful. I once got mad at a family and drew a little girl with a claw hand. Then they tipped me $40. I drew a lot of juggalos. People in wheelchairs who felt stuck at the park with nothing to do. People who hated it and wouldn't pay. I only got called racist once at least. Edit, completely forgot about the time a man propositioned to have me come back to his hotel room and draw him and his friend nude. Worked at Valley Fair, Cedar Fair's sister location, in park services restrooms. One day a dude took a sheet so massive that it wouldn't flush. I had to retrieve a pair of salad tongs and throw it in the trash as it was one solid roundish chunk. Don't get me started on the water park bathrooms. Too many people go down the vertical slide with loose holes and end up with an enema. They can never seem to actually sit down and end up spraying the wall like a sheet fountain. I worked at large theme park. The water ride I worked at had issues. The loading platform was on a turntable. The boats would turn when guests were loading because the runners on each side weren't synchronized properly. So, to shield guests, we had to put one foot on the boat and one foot on the turntable. Well, I'm short with short legs. So, after that occurred and the turntable decided to jerk backwards, I fell into the water. I had to be pulled out by my lead since I was stunned and the water had started to drain from the stop being pressed. It was an adventure. My girlfriend was a Disney princess for around 9 years. They used to have a lot of requests for Children's Wish foundations to meet their favorite princess. As you may know, you are never allowed to break character under any circumstance. Anyways, one year she met a girl that had terminal cancer. Around 12 years old. They spent most of the day together, starting with the Disney breakfast up until the parade. The staff always said these are the most trying days because as much as they get to help a child out, it puts a toll on them emotionally. About a week later, her superior forwarded her the letter from this girl saying how much it meant to her meeting her. Her superior broke this rule by showing her the letter. Fast forward 9 years. She is still working as a princess. It's Jasmine BTW. A girl comes up to her and says, "You'll never believe how much you helped me through everything in that one day." She shows her a photo and it is the same girl that beat her terminal cancer. The one time my girlfriend every broke character and started crying on the spot. I don't work at Disney World, but I do drive Uber in that area. Once I gave a ride to a teenage employee who told me she's worked at Space Mountain and it's very common for people to dump the ashes of their loved ones in the park. Most prominently at Space Mountain and the Haunted Mansion. The employees use special code names for certain incidents when you report them over the radio, and the code for this one is Code Grandma, though the official name is Code D. The employees, being teenagers who don't get paid or respected enough, instead use Code Grandma.